is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Pay heed all who enter, and beware this podcast. This is the Pay Heed Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer with Kevin Flaherty. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And if you're listening, if anyone we're listening to this podcast, we will be either 14 weeks away from KU football season or less than 14 weeks away from KU football season, which, listen, 14 weeks, Kevin, I got to be honest, that sounds like a long time. I just got to be honest. It sounds like a long time. But
yeah,
I have no fear.
I think the KU account put out, what was it, a couple days ago, maybe, that it was 100 days. And I was just, I thought about replying like it's too long or whatever. But yeah, it's one of those things where these 2 weeks do tend to go fairly quickly. I feel like, people, they go out on summer vacations or whatever. Then you have Big 12 Media Day that kind of gets people excited, and then fall camp. And next thing you know, you're on the field. So those 14 weeks do tend to go fairly quickly. But at the same time, when you say it, 14 weeks or 100 days, it seems like an eternity before Kansas is going to be back out on the field.
Well, and we here at the Pay Heed Podcast, we have a special series throughout the summer to help you get through the offseason and prepare for the upcoming fall of 2024 for KU football. It's a little series we're going to be calling the Jayhawk Rewind. We're going to go through every game from the 2023 season, break it down, what happened, our reactions to it, what we thought going in, take a little trip down memory lane and enter into the teleporter, time teleportation machine thingy, mabob, whatever terms, words. We're going to do that every week here on the pod leading up to the start of the 2024 season against Lindenwood. So you guessed it, we're 14 weeks out. KU played 13 games last season, so we're going to get once a week all the way leading up to the week before KU kicks off the 2024 season against Lindenwood. So Kansas is going to be starting 2024 against an FCS opponent, and they started 2023 against an FCS opponent. So get in the time machine, put on your tinfoil hat. All right, here we go. Go back to September 1st, 2023. Kansas at David Booth Kansas Memorial Stadium taking on Missouri State. Think about Kansas coming out the 2022 season. They went to a bowl game, went to Liberty Bowl, played against Arkansas. And I think the general sense after that was, hey, maybe KU was a year ahead of schedule, right? Maybe they were a year ahead of schedule in 2022, making a bowl game, right? The general thought was, okay, maybe in 2022 you can win 3 or 4, maybe 5 games. And then in 2023 you take the step. Well, they're a year ahead of schedule. And so I think the central question coming into 2023 was KU going to just be another 6-7 win team, or were they going to take another step forward and win 9 games and be a more upper tier Big 12 team? And it all started with this game against Missouri State. So the big story heading into this game obviously was the Jalen Daniels situation, right?
Sure.
Jalen Daniels tweaks his back, suffers a back injury. KU played things very close to the vest. What do you remember about that, Kevin, leading into the game, and maybe what your thoughts were about this game and maybe even going forward in terms of Jalen Daniels' health?
Yeah, it was a little bit terrifying because anytime you hear injury and your starting quarterback, it's not a good thing. But back injuries, I think, and something that people came to understand over the course of the year, they're so fickle, right? Like it's, when you have a back injury, improvement's not always linear. It's not something where you're like, I feel better on Thursday, so I'm going to feel better on Friday. And I think that played out over the course of the season. For those who forgot, Jalen Daniels, he suited up against Missouri State. He did not play, but he, the thought line afterwards or whatever was, hey, if he had really needed to play or whatever else, he maybe could have played it. And so it was a little bit of a warning sign that he didn't just go out and play like, okay, he's not fully healthy. They don't feel, great about him going out and taking hits in this game. But at the same time, I think it was a pretty nice indicator for something we would see later on down the season, which is they had a lot of faith in Jason Bean, and Jason Bean wound up being, arguably the best backup quarterback in the entire country when you look at what they do. I'm not sure of a lot of teams that can have the preseason All Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year play 3 games for them at the quarterback position and still go on and win 9 games.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Jalen Daniels, obviously preseason Offensive Player of the Year in the Big 12, right? Yep. So the hype probably couldn't have been any greater for him, for KU kind of going into the season from the KU fan perspective. And then you immediately have a pretty significant damper on that with sort of the back tightness, back injury that he was dealing with. And very early on, KU was playing it very, very close to the vest. If you recall, Kevin, actually, KU announced Jalen Daniels as the starting quarterback on the video board at the stadium.
Yeah, to cheers. Everybody's kind of like, okay, Jalen's starting, and then, the rug kind of pulled out. It was a nice little fast one that they pulled on that one.
Yeah. So, you think about that and you think about where KU was and kind of before we dive into the game, another thought that I had really leading into it is, my thought was, okay, if Kansas wants to be taken seriously as a legit Power 5 team, or I guess now Power 4 team at the FBS level, you need to go out and you need to dominate your FCS opponents, right?
Sure.
You need to go out and really steamroll your opponents. You think about Missouri State. That Missouri State was a team that had gone to the FCS playoff in 2021. Then Bobby Petrino ended up leaving. I think they had a down year in 2022. Bobby Petrino ended up leaving the program, which kind of cost him turmoil within them. But this is certainly a situation where I felt going into it, Missouri State was a step up from Tennessee Tech, which was their opponent in 2022. So to that end, I wanted to see KU go out and assert their dominance early and really control this game against Missouri State.
Yeah, I think even beyond that, the offseason chatter for so much of it, and it's kind of interesting to look back at it. There was so much talk about the way that Kansas just didn't match up on the lines with Arkansas in that game. Kansas wasn't able to line up and run the ball on Arkansas. If you were there in person, like I was, there was a noticeable physical difference up front between what Arkansas had being an SEC school and what Kansas had, and I think, there was a lot of discussion about, Kansas needs to get better at those spots. They need to get bigger at those spots so that they could do a lot of the things that they wanted. You go out in the offseason, you get a guy like Spencer Lavelle, who is a lot bigger guy that they thought could maybe join in that rotation. Defensively, you add Devin Phillips, to kind of do the same thing. And they added other guys like Austin Booker and things like that. But I mean, specifically from the let's match up from a size standpoint, in the trenches, that was a big part of it too. It wasn't necessarily, hey, you want to see Kansas blow Missouri State out and be comfortable, but it was you want to see Kansas win up front against Missouri State because, like you said, Tennessee Tech, was kind of on the lower end of FCS teams when Kansas played them. It was a matchup that Kansas controlled pretty easily start to finish. But you go back the year before that, it was a lot bigger issue up front. And granted, Kansas was only going to be a 2-win team that year, that being one of the 2 wins. But at the same time, Kansas wasn't overwhelmingly effective up front. And so with the competition taking a step up, at least within FCS, with Kansas coming off that Arkansas game, I felt like that was one of the other main takeaways was you really wanted to see Kansas go up front, move guys around with the offensive line, with the defensive line, kind of close down things in the running game, and that was the way it went.
Yeah, and I think, listen, for the better part of half a decade or more, Kansas against an FCS opponent, you went into it thinking, oh, geez, just find a way to not lose, right? Find a way to win the game. I mean, you go back, you lose to Nichols, you lose to North Dakota State, go back, a decade. Tight win against South Dakota, tight win against Indiana State, if you remember, to start the Les Miles era. Like, just go out, for the long time, it was just, oh my gosh, just go out and find a way to win. And then, you whip up on Tennessee Tech in 2022. And again, that's kind of where my thought process was coming in. It's like, okay, Missouri State is objectively a more difficult FCS opponent than Tennessee Tech is. Let's go out and dominate. Let's go out and make a statement and say, hey, this is a legitimate Power 5 team. This is a legitimate team that wants to compete for a Big 12 title. Because I think that's what you have to do if you want to be that team, is you have to show that you can dominate at that level. So that was kind of my thought heading into the start of the season against Missouri State. Let's break down the game coming up next after this break. We do have to tell you about our sponsors, though, at Home Field Apparel. You can go to homefieldapparel.com and get over 130 different schools. They've got T-shirts, sweatshirts, joggers, all kinds of stuff. I've got my Jayhawk shirt here from Home Field Apparel on right now if you're watching on YouTube. You can use promo code KCSN23 from 15% off your first order. Listen, if you're trying to get ahead of the curve, now would be the time to get yourself a Jayhawk sweater, some joggers, so that you can be ready to go in the fall when it gets a little bit chillier for KU football. So that's homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code KCSN23 for 15% off your first order. We'll break down Kansas and Missouri State coming up next here on Pay Heat.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
This is the Pay Heat podcast here on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. This episode is the Jayhawk Rewind. We're going to take you all the way back through every game of KU football's 2023 season. Take a little trip down memory lane to jog that memory to get you set for the start of the 2024 season. And this was week 1, Kansas and Missouri State, KU's FCF's opponents. Let's dive into this game, Kevin. So, as I said, Jalen Daniels announced as the starter on the video board, but then here comes Jason Bean. Again, the Jason Bean storyline is obviously so interesting. We now know, of course, that he's one of the more beloved players, I think, from KU. But you go back to the end of the 2022 season and that offseason, I think there was a lot of sense from some KU fans of they would be okay if Jason Bean was not back. And the general sense was he would not be back. But then he doesn't end up returning. The KU football staff, basically coaxes him back. And then here he is starting in week 1 because of the Jalen Daniels back injury against Missouri State. This was an interesting game where things started pretty slowly for both teams, especially offensively. Kansas got the scoring started with a 48-yard touchdown run from Devin Neal. This was a game where, Devin Neal was just outstanding. From start to finish, he made some great plays, but he got the scoring started for Kansas. They got up 7-0, but things got a little hairy there for a little bit in the second quarters. Missouri State, they would score a touchdown to tie it up and eventually take the lead. What was kind of your thoughts early in this game as Kansas took on Missouri State?
Yeah, first on the Devin touchdown run, it was kind of interesting because the offseason, talking to a few NFL scouts, they felt like, I think heading into the season, the ones that I talked to, Daniel Highshaw was the better NFL prospect of Kansas's, sort of two-headed running back attack. There was a feeling a little bit that maybe Devin was a little bit stiff in the hips, maybe a little bit of a straight line guy. That first touchdown run, he breaks multiple ankles with just really sharp cuts. And it was a prelude, I think, to Devin taking his game up even another notch. And he was really good as a sophomore. But he fixed a lot of those things that I think were question marks in terms of, hey, how sharp does this guy cut? Is he just a straight line guy? All of those things. And so to see the agility, the quickness, the ability to make somebody miss in space was really encouraging from that standpoint. But like you said, Kansas comes out, you get 3 straight completed passes from Jason Bean, then the touchdown run from Devin Neal. You're probably kind of thinking like, okay, like this is exactly what I see. It's going to cruise, and it didn't go that way. And when you looked at it, it wasn't that the defense was playing badly necessarily. The offense was a little bit slow, and yet at the same time, you kind of look up at that scoreboard and say, oh my gosh, it's 10-7. You score 7 points in the first quarter. You score 7 points in the first quarter with that touchdown drive being like a 4-play drive that hit really quickly. And I think you're kind of like, okay, this is, I don't want to say danger zone, but let's pick things up a little bit. And I do think you maybe had a little bit modified expectations with Jason Bean being in rather than Jalen Daniels. It was kind of a, let's survive and move on to the next one. Not necessarily that you wanted to win by 7, but you knew that it wasn't necessarily going to be, the prettiest thing. But at the same time, anytime you're down to an FCS team at home, you start getting the tweets coming across the deck that say, people should watch out, like Missouri State's up in Kansas, even if it's early or whatever else. And, Kansas did respond a little bit to go into halftime up 17-10, but at the same time, being up 7 points at halftime over an FCS opponent isn't necessarily where you want to be either.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts there. You mentioned Daniel Highshaw. he had a critical fumble with Kansas up 7-0. So Kansas gets the touchdown. They had forced consecutive punts from the Missouri State offense, but he fumbles near midfield, and that is what allowed Missouri State to go score their touchdown and tie it up. That kind of got them going a little bit. And then Kansas had actually a 4th and 1 at the Missouri State 27 in the second quarter and decided to go for it with Devin Neal and got stopped. And that then propelled Missouri State to go kick a field goal to take the lead, which I think was interesting because obviously another big talking point of the offseason was the special teams, right?
Sure.
In 2022, that was a big issue for KU in some games. I always think back to like the Iowa State game where both special teams were terrible, but Iowa State was a little bit worse. And that is not very smart, so they lost. It was awesome. Anyways, in this case, though, at the 27, that's a long field goal. Kansas decides, hey, you know what? It's 4th and 1. Let's go for it. They got stuffed, and Missouri State goes down. And that's what ultimately allowed them to take the lead 10-7 in the second quarter. But a great response from Kansas, right? A great response from KU to get things going. And they would ultimately go down and get some points and eventually take a – comfortable is not the right term, but take a lead at least into half. You're not down at the half, right?
Yeah, and I think, to your point, you're never going to be 100% polished in week one, and quite frankly, you don't necessarily want to be because then you want to grow, as the season goes on. But this getting stuffed on Devin Neal, it was one of several plays that I think you noticed where it was like somebody missed a block or, the offensive line wasn't as cohesive yet as maybe you would have hoped against an FCS opponent. They ran the ball well. I think they averaged over 6 yards a carry as a team. Of course, Devin Neal going for 48 helps, that average. You run for, what was it, like over 250 yards in the game, I think. Just a sec. 245 was what they finished with. But at the same time, there were multiple plays in there where you thought, okay, let's run the ball and be effective here. Yeah, and they didn't make the block or whatever else. The consistency wasn't maybe there as much as you would have liked. Like you said, great response on the touchdown drive. I thought Kansas's receivers were terrific in this game, and I thought that was something that also, on this show and these lookbacks, we're going to try to point to stuff that indicated not just what was going to happen later in 2023, but things that could roll into 2024. I think one of the things that makes Kansas's receiving core so good is you can't concentrate on one guy, right? Lawrence Arnold had a really big catch on the touchdown drive. Then you had Jason Bean with a terrific throw and catch to Luke Grimm, sort of on a corner route for the touchdown. Later in the game, you have Quentin Skinner with a huge catch. You have Trevor Wilson with the tough catch. And so I thought that group was really good. But at the same time, that's the thing that makes them tough to defend is there's not necessarily a 1A guy where you go into a game and say, we have to shut down this guy. He's their Biletnikoff candidate. But at the same time, Kansas has 3 or 4 guys that are all capable of going for 100-plus yards, and each of them got involved at different points, including 2 different guys on that touchdown drive.
Yeah, so Kansas goes down 10-7, and like you alluded to, a 52-yard pass from Jason Bean to Lawrence Arnold, which was, by the way, obviously we know Jason Bean's arm strength, but it was a rocket, by the way, in case you're wondering, on a deep post route to Lawrence Arnold. And then, on the very next play, he makes an equally difficult throw to the corner of the end zone for a touchdown. That was a
big-time throw, I thought,
Yeah, so really, really awesome stuff there. So quick response, 3 plays for Kansas to get back in front after going down 10-7. They'd eventually add a field goal to go up 17-10 going into the second half. And then in the second half, it was a bit interesting. Kansas immediately goes down a long drive to start the second half to go for another touchdown. It was capped off by a Dylan McDuffie touchdown run, actually. Shout out to Dylan McDuffie, one-time player for Buffalo, transferred in. He was at Buffalo, then Georgia Tech, then came to Kansas for his last season back with Lance Leipold. He would score on a long drive, 9 plays, 70 yards, took 5 minutes off the clock. Kansas goes up 24-10. You're thinking, oh, okay, finally. Now here we go. We're cooking. Let's go, let's go run it up on these guys. But again, Missouri State kept hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah, this was Missouri State wound up having a drive, aided by a couple big plays, some missed tackles on defense, and they scored a touchdown on the first play of the fourth quarter. to make it 27-17. So you're up 10. You're not necessarily like I said, you're not necessarily feeling like, you're in danger zone or anything like that. But it's a little bit more uncomfortable than what you were hoping for in the fourth quarter to be there, within 2 scores. You're in a spot where, Kansas comes out. I think from what I remember on that next drive, Kansas faces like a 3rd and 6. And, again, if Missouri State gets the stop there, you're not necessarily biting your fingernails, but you are a little bit worried. The momentum is maybe ticking back that way a little bit. Jason Bean connects on, I think, a 12-yard pass to Lawrence Arnold. It keeps the drive going. Daniel Highshaw caps it off with a really nice physical touchdown run, especially down around the goal line. You get a little bit of breathing room, and that was where the snowball started rolling downhill the way that you had kind of hoped it would.
Yeah, and I think one thing about this game that really stood out to me kind of as the game unfolded was KU never really panicked, I don't think. There was never really a lot of panic on the sideline. I think they stayed pretty poised, which is obviously something you love to see from a team, right? Like KU got pushed, right? It was a tight game at half, closer game at half than maybe you expected. Same deal going into the fourth quarter. It's still, you're only up 10. And then to have that response after the Missouri State touchdown drive to go down and score on a touchdown of your own to make it 34-17, now all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, now we can maybe breathe a little bit deeper here. And then Missouri State helps out by, on the very first play of their next drive, throwing it to Kobe Bryant for an interception. Kansas then scores again, and within the span of about 90 seconds of game time, it goes from 27-17 to 41-17, and that was pretty much all she wrote, I think, at that point for Kansas.
Yeah, you get touchdown, interception, or whatever, and things just started opening up. And credit to the defense, I thought they played a good overall game when you look at the yardage that they held Missouri State to, and yards per play and things like that. They did a pretty good job. There were a few big plays here and there. Missouri State had a pretty good running back, Jacardier Wright, who was a former K-State guy. And he made a play or two. When you look at the final stats, I think Kansas held them. Sorry, I'm bringing this up. Held them to 2.7 yards a carry, which is really good. 74 yards rushing, but of that 74 yards rushing, more than a third came on one carry from Wright. He had a 26-yard carry. Jacob Clark, the quarterback, had a 17-yard carry. And so after, other than those 2 carries, the faucet was kind of shut off for Missouri State trying to run the ball. And we talked earlier in this podcast about wanting to see Kansas succeed more up front. I thought Kansas's defensive tackle group really showed the growth that they had from the previous year to this year. And again, it's not like they were playing Arkansas again. The competition level was different. But at the same time, I'm not sure Kansas's defensive tackle group in 2022 would have had the success that the group had against Missouri State in 2023, especially in week 1. And I thought those guys were really good.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. Certainly was shutting down their run game. And, this is a Missouri State team that their quarterback, they're one of their guys who was in the starting quarterback battle, transferred out. They had some issues, but they came in and listen, put up a good fight, right? But the Kansas defense was really strong, to your point. And then you get the Kobe Bryant interception. That leads to Kansas scoring immediately again. And then a really cool story with Quentin Lassiter getting an interception as well, right? I mean, I think his dad was in attendance for that game as well, and with his brother Kwame, right? Yeah, was there.
Yeah.
So really cool story there, right? A great Jayhawk family, and for him to get that interception late in the game was pretty cool, and that helped Kansas then go down and kind of really cap it off with a big win, 48-17 over Missouri State. Again, it maybe wasn't the prettiest game in the world. It maybe wasn't how you hoped it would unfold, with it still being tight. But kind of like I mentioned, I mean, my immediate takeaway from it was, hey, listen, you were pushed a little bit if you're Kansas, but you maintained poise, you didn't panic, and you ended up getting the job done and moving to 1-0. And I thought that was a really great thing, because yes, did I want to see Kansas go out and kind of dominate? Sure, yes. But at the end of the day, you end up getting the win, you move forward, you're 1-0. What was kind of your, immediate post-game reaction, if you can recall, of how you felt coming out of that game?
Yeah, it's kind of funny if you're, a quote-unquote box score scout. Kansas winds up with 521 yards to 217, so outgaining them by over 300 yards. Had 7.9 yards per play. We already talked about how they shut off the running game. And so the numbers would never indicate that this was a close game or a game where you were a little bit nervous, in the second half. But that was absolutely what it was. Like you said, the way that they were able to respond to, I say being punched in the mouth. I think the way you put it, being pushed was a good way to put it. They were challenged, and the way that they closed things out was highly encouraging. And I think, in addition to, them just being a better team, as we would come to find out, I think it showed the depth too, because I think when you looked at a lot of Kansas's issues in previous years, and even before Lance Leipold got here, we could do an entire episode dedicated to the scholarship deficits and things like that. Not only was Kansas, scholarship tight in terms of bumping up against that 85 scholarship limit, they were scholarship tight with legitimate Big 12 players. And so when the game got late, they were able to have the energy to close things out. The defense played extremely well down the stretch. The offense took advantage of those late opportunities to put things away. Savion Morrison winds up scoring a touchdown. I think he's a guy that, because of the injuries and things like that, people tend to look at it as, hey, it's Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw. And, knocking on wood, Devin Neal should have every chance to set Kansas's career rushing record this year. But I think we sleep on Savion Morrison's talent sometimes, because he's a guy that when he is healthy, this is a former 4-star running back, a guy that has some talent, some speed, some things to him. And so if Kansas can get him healthy and keep him healthy, he's another option in that backfield this year that maybe doesn't get enough play in terms of being a guy that can help them out.
Listen, I'm glad you brought that up, because I am the president of the Savion Morrison fan club. I've loved this guy all along. I think he's got a great change of pace capability. He's got electric speed, and he's a guy that, as maybe not as like an every down player, but as a change of pace guy that can come in and really have some explosive plays. And he's produced explosive plays for Kansas actually in his career already. Transfer from Nebraska. I've always liked Savion Morrison as a player that can come in certain situations and give you a different look. But as you said, the issue is that he's dealt with injuries quite a bit. That's kind of hindered him. But yeah, he's a guy that I think if you look into 2024, if he finds a way to stay healthy going into the fall, he's a player that you're not going to see him a lot, but maybe he gets the ball occasionally and ends up making some big plays. So, yeah.
And don't forget, he's, and I hate to cut you off, but don't forget, he's a junior. And so, he's somebody that could help out this year. Next year, when Devin Neal, is no longer on the team. I was going to say no longer a Jayhawk, but Devin Neal will be a Jayhawk for 300 plus years or whatever. But when Devin Neal has moved on to the NFL, he's a guy that could factor in a much bigger role in that rotation. And obviously, with portal and things like that, you hate to get too far ahead, but at the same time, I do think that he showed some flashes in that game. He showed some flashes at different times. So, Nick, looking at coming out of that game, and not just for the rest of that 2023 season, but moving into 2024, what are some things that you take away from that win against Missouri State? And I realize it's Missouri State, but there were some things that I think you can look at and say, this is something that maybe could lead into something in 2024.
Yeah, I kind of go back to what you mentioned earlier with the wide receivers, right?
Yeah.
I think back to the 2022 season. Going into that season, you looked at the wide receiver room and you thought, gosh, that might be the weakest room on the team. I mean, I don't really, I am not feeling confident about that at all. And they go out and what do? They ball out, right? Then you come into 2023 and you're thinking, okay, strong stable of receivers, but do you really know exactly what maybe the ceiling is for those guys, or just how good those guys can be? And in Missouri State, we got a taste of that, right? We got a taste of Jason Bean throwing the deep ball to Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm with some great toe taps for a touchdown as well. And yeah, you really started to feel like, okay, wait a minute, these boys might have something here on the outside. And now, throughout the rest of the course of that season, and then going into 2024, you look at the wide receiver room for Kansas, and you think, gosh, that is one of the deepest talented rooms you have on the whole team, right, with those guys. And the cool thing about that even more so is the fact that those are players that have come up together, right? They've come up together. Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm, Quinn Skinner, they have grown up together. They've blossomed together. I remember Quinn Skinner being kind of a more quiet, reserved guy in 2022 and 2023. Now you talk to him now, and he's outspoken. He's a leader. He's charismatic, so on and so forth. So to just see them grow as players, that core specifically, and then on top of that, to see them grow off the field as well into the type of leaders that they are, really awesome to see. And I think you got a little bit of just a tiny taste of that, the appetizer, so to speak, of that against Missouri State, which was really cool. And that's something that now, again, you look into 2024, and I'm over the moon about these guys. Hopefully they didn't go back and happen to hear what I said about them before 2022. They might be kind of mad because I said that I thought they were weak. But no, these guys are fantastic. And I think you have every reason to be very, very excited about what they could do, what they did do throughout the rest of 2023 and now going into 2024.
Yeah, I think there were also a lot of big plays from guys that had roles last year, but will be stepping into bigger roles in 2024. Marvin Grant had a terrific run stop. He's a guy that I know both of us feel like he could have all Big 12 potential this year, stepping into kind of that starting safety spot. J.B. Brown was the guy that became really important to them over the course of the year and will be likely a starter this year and get an even bigger role. He had the tipped pass that led to the Kobe Bryant interception. The defensive tackles we talked about, there were some really nice plays in there by Tommy Dunn, up front. A guy that I thought was kind of interesting on rewatch, Trevor Cardell had a couple catches, one of which was like a back shoulder thing where he adjusted really well to the ball. Trevor Cardell's a guy that if he can stay healthy, I think there's ability there, and he has a chance to have a really nice season. People forget he was a high school wide receiver, and so, he has some of those talents in the passing game that they can tap into maybe a little bit. He can adjust to passes. He's got good hands. He can get down the field as a route runner. There were some encouraging moments there too. And so I think when you look at all of those different things, you're seeing some guys, like you said, the receivers that went on to prove it all the way across 2023. You're seeing guys that, wound up having some good moments in 2023, but are heading into 2024 expected to make an even bigger impact. And I'm glad you brought up the receivers too. I thought by the end of the year, and we'll get to this when we get to Kansas State, and I don't want to spoil it or anything like that. I thought one of the downsides about that game was I really thought the matchup where Kansas was better than Kansas State, the area where Kansas really matched up well, and by the end of the year, was I really thought Kansas State was going to struggle to deal with Kansas's wide receivers. And obviously, you have a quarterback injury. You're in a situation where you don't necessarily want Cole Ballard in his first college start putting the ball in the air 45 times or whatever. But I'm just saying, like, by that point, and certainly before that point, receiver had become such a strength for this team that you did go into a really big-time matchup like that, feeling like maybe your biggest advantage was at that position, and that shows how far that group came.
Yeah, and a quick point on Trevor Cardell as well. You think about the opportunity that he has in front of him now coming into this season with the injury to Iowa State transfer Deshaun Hanukkah, who is a player that I think Katie was hoping could help in that tight end room in terms of, trying to fill the loss of contribution they had from Mason Fairchild. Well, it doesn't sound like he's going to be available really anytime soon. So now you have a situation with for Trevor Cardell where, hey, you have a chance to really step in and kind of become the guy, right? We all love Jared Casey, but Jared Casey, he's not going to be your main receiving threat as a tight end, right? He's excellent in some of the other areas and can do different things, but he's not going to be your main receiving threat. So there is an opportunity there for Cardell going into 2024. And he's the guy that obviously dealt with injuries in 2023 as well. So health will be a critical thing for him also at the position taken in 2024. But the bottom line is KU football 1-0. You got through Missouri State, and you're on to Illinois, which we'll be talking about next week here on Pay Heed. So that's our Jayhawk Rewind for Game 1 of the 2023 season, Kansas and Missouri State. I want to make a quick couple of notes here before we get out of here for KU on the KU basketball front right now in the offseason. There was so Kansas obviously lost to Riley Kugel. If you missed out on that, you can check out a previous episode talking Riley Kugel after he ended up decommitting and committed to Mississippi State actually last week, I believe. So he'll be a Bulldog now for Mississippi State, which is cool. Best of luck to him. And so Kansas down to 11 scholarship players. Obviously, there's been so much discussion about, okay, does KU want to go with 12? Do they want to get rid of this last scholarship? Do they want to get to 13? What's kind of the thought process? The big name that we kind of discussed was Jackson Robinson, a guy who's in the NBA draft process that KU seems to have interest in. Another guy was Javon Small, a transfer from Oklahoma State, who KU, I think, kicked the tires on a little bit. He eventually committed to West Virginia. And then there was some smoke about him not signing with West Virginia. Well, he did officially sign earlier in the week. So it seems like Kansas now is in a position where you hope maybe to see what happens to Jackson Robinson. But now you're in a spot, if you're Kansas, where maybe do you look in the summer to another international guy like a Johnny Furphy? I mean, I know Johnny Furphy still just crawl on trees, but I mean, at this point, you're stuck with 11 guys. I don't know where's kind of your thought or your head at right now, and as it pertains to KU basketball this offseason.
Yeah, I think when you're at that spot where they're at, I think it makes a lot of sense if you can to add Jackson Robinson and then see where it goes. Right? You see what happens from that point. I don't believe Johnny Furphy is coming back to school, but you have that scholarship still available if for whatever reason that happens. I think you also have that scholarship available, like you said, if there is an international player, if there is a reclassification. We've seen Marvin Bagley, for instance, from Duke reclassify late, in recent years. He's certainly not the only one, but he was maybe the most high-profile one, becoming the number one player in that class when he did it. And so I think you kind of target Jackson Robinson and saying, hey, if this is our 12, we can roll with this 12. And that scholarship is there. You don't necessarily have to use it, but at the same time, it is there. It's available in case a too good to pass up type situation happens.
So in case you're wondering, as it pertains to both Jackson Robinson and Johnny Furphy, who are both in the NBA draft process, they have until the end of this month, I believe, so the end of May, to basically come back. And then at that point, they will be locked in, I think, then going forward in terms of like the NBA combine stuff and so on and so forth. So we're talking next week, probably we're going to have a very definitive look at what KU might be working with in terms of what they want to do for the 12th and 13th scholarship potentially, whether it is a situation where Jackson Robinson, a transfer from BYU, decides to come back, or even a Johnny Furphy, right? I think that the Johnny Furphy discourse has been so up and down in terms of what the thought process is with him. It seems like now maybe the thought is he's probably going to go ahead and stay in the draft, but obviously that I guess could still be a possibility. We'll see for Kansas. And, obviously I think it's pretty clear that Bill Self is looking to have as much depth as possible coming into this upcoming season. So, that he's probably behind the scenes working and trying to figure out, okay, what are some guys that are available that have some interest in coming. And Robinson is a guy, of course, that torched KU at Allen Fieldhouse. So he certainly is familiar with making big shots at Allen Fieldhouse, just wearing the wrong jersey.
And I think even beyond that, the fact that he's shown so much comfort coming off the bench and being that microwave guy. And if you were to look at this KU team and say, okay, if you can add one more piece, let's just say you have one scholarship left, you're not going to use the other one. What do you need to add? What's the thing that's on the table that you need to fill? You would want a wing, obviously, but you would want a wing who, could potentially come off the bench and provide real offensive impact. And Jackson Robinson, he's that guy. Also, did you see his combine measurements? The guy can apparently tie his shoes without bending over with that wingspan. So, a lot of times, I do think I don't want to say wingspan gets oversold, but because it is important, and it's really important for wings who have to defend, up and down, basically, to have that sort of length. But at the same time, sometimes you see a wingspan and you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's part of the reason this guy scores is he has a great scoring package, but also it's really tough to block the guy's shot when he's got that kind of length and everything else too.
Another guy to keep an eye on with wingspan talk is Flory Badunga. That guy also has a huge wingspan, the incoming freshman for KU. So
he measured, I think 6'7" in shoes as a center. And so you're kind of like, oh, that's not good. And then you see he's got the standing reach. I mean, forget the wingspan and whatever else. His standing reach was that of like a 7-foot guy. I mean, it was it was like 9'1" or 9'2" or whatever it is. And so
what jumped out to me was Kamen Malik, I think is how you say it, the center who committed to Duke, who actually was listed at 7 foot.
Yeah,
Dunga's wingspan was like 2 inches shorter than him, and he's literally like 5 inches shorter than him in terms of height, and yet his wingspan is almost the same.
Yeah, it's funny. I covered a guy at Texas that had a really good wingspan, but was really short. And, I remember talking to one of the coaches about it, and they said, well, he's just got no neck. And so, and so it was one of those things where where it was like, don't worry about the guy's height. Like, the height isn't as important. Like, his shoulders are even at a relatively normal height for a tall guy. It's just his head is basically set right on his shoulders, and that's why he's not super tall. But he had, a lot like Flory, he had this great standing reach. He had, the big wingspan and everything else. And when you look at in Flory's athleticism and everything, it makes that play up as well. He's got good timing. He's quick off the floor. He's a quick second jumper when he needs to get off the floor again. And so you add in the wingspan with all of that stuff, and no, he may not be as tall as a quote unquote classic center, but I think when you look at the different things he's able to do from a wingspan and reach standpoint, from a shot blocking standpoint, those things are all there.
So the bottom line for KU basketball right now is they are sitting at 11 scholarship players, so they do have the possibility of bringing in one, maybe two, like we discussed, more players to add to the roster. And again, like I said, you get the sense that Bill Self probably wants to do that. He stated publicly he wants to have 8 starters. So take that information as you will. So we'll see how things play out in the upcoming weeks. Of course, we'll have it covered here on the Pay podcast as well with what happens to KU basketball in the offseason. And again, we'll have the Jayhawk Rewind coming up every week from now until the start of the 2024 season. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Illinois
Do what?
Illinois next week.
Yeah, and that was certainly a very interesting game that I'm pretty excited to talk about with you, Kevin. So be sure to be on the lookout for that next week on the Pay podcast. Don't forget, if you like what you heard, or if you're watching on YouTube, if you like what you saw, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment. Give us your thoughts, how you were feeling during the Missouri State game and afterwards as well, as part of the Jayhawk Rewind. So like, comment, subscribe. That all helps us get out there, get more eyes and ears on us. We appreciate your support. As always, we'll be back next week with more on the Pay podcast here on the Kansas City Sports Network. Talk to you later. See ya.